Does it seem strange? Unbelievable? Listen. To the world. Sunshine, trees, hills and valleys, flowers and flowing streams. This world of tomorrow is a world of beauty. These eternal things, wrought by God, are lovely and unchanging. Come, let's travel into the future. What will we see?
Good morning. It's good to be back with you. It was 2 years ago that I was here, and good to see some familiar faces and friends. And thank you for having me back. Didn't upset too many of you last time, so I aim to do that today. I just wanted to briefly recap what I said 2 years ago, because when I was here 2 years ago, Nvader was just a dream, but now it's a reality. And that's really exciting. What I want to share with you this morning is actually good news. And it's why you're all here this morning. Good news that I want to celebrate with you all this morning is that Christ the Saviour has come, and He's come to set us free. He's come to set us free. Having said that, as I said 2 years ago, I'm always a little bit nervous in a church because I really hate religion. And one of the things I love about Jesus is that He was and is so unreligious. The most fully alive person that ever walked the earth, and yet, as you all know, in many ways, the most unreligious. And it was the religious people of His day that gave Him the biggest headaches. It was the religious people of His day that ultimately facilitated His death. And it was the religious people of His day for whom He reserved His harshest words. And some might say that nothing has changed. Not everyone who says, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father. And many will say on that day, but Lord, look at all this religious stuff we did in your name. And he'll say those words that we all hope we never hear. I never knew you. His words should have come as no surprise, though, because hundreds and hundreds of years before Christ walked the earth, God spoke through the prophet Amos, and he said, I cannot stand your religious meetings. In other words, I can't stand your church services. I'm fed up with your conferences and your conventions. I want nothing to do with your religion projects, your pretentious slogans, and your goals. I'm sick of your fundraising schemes, your PR and your image making. I've had all I can take of your noisy ego music. Do you know what I really want? Do you know what I really want? I want justice. Isaiah goes even further and says that worship without justice is a stench in the face of God. And then you shoot ahead to the New Testament. And we hear a lot in our Western churches about the importance of being a believer. And because a lot of our media comes from America, typically it's the importance of being a believer. But James says being a believer is not enough. He says, so you believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Big deal. Even the demons are well aware of who Jesus is. And then he goes on and he says, but you know what? There is one form of religion that God does accept as pure. And it's to rescue orphans and widows from their distress, vulnerable women and children, and to keep yourself from becoming enslaved. So this morning I just wanted to share again some stories with you of some modern orphans and widows that I had the honor of meeting. Oops. Okay, there we go. Some of you may remember, I tell this story because this was when the world changed for me. It was meeting this girl called Maria. Maria was only 12 years old when a group of men approached her and her very poor mother in Latin America. And they promised Maria and her mother a job for Maria. They said, we can take her to a factory where she will make and sell clothing, and she'll make enough money to send home to support your entire family. So with the blessing of the family, Maria went with these men. And when they crossed the border, instead of taking her to a clothing factory, she was taken to a brothel. Where at the age of 12, she was brutalized and raped and told that she had a debt to pay off because they'd spent money getting her there, more than $5,000, and the way she was going to pay that debt off was selling her body. First opportunity Maria got, she escaped, and she ran down the road. She burst through the doors of the local police station, and she told them what had happened to her. The local police took her straight back to the brothel because they provided protection for the criminals that worked there. They made money from the business, and they got free girls whenever they wanted them. Maria ran away a second time, and the same thing happened. And this time they said, now you have twice the debt to pay off. So when I met Maria, she was about 15, going on 16. She had been in this brothel for 2 or 3 years, and she had absolutely no recourse to justice. She had absolutely no recourse to justice. I had paid to have sex with Maria. I'd spoken to the brothel manager. He told me in great detail what she was good at and not good at and how much it would cost, how long I could have her for. And I paid him the money. What he didn't know was that I was wearing a covert camera and I was recording that whole transaction, and in doing so, gathered evidence of a crime, because he'd just sold me a child, but he'd also just sold me a victim of trafficking, of modern-day slavery. And that evidence was information that we hoped we could then use to facilitate Maria's rescue and the prosecution of all the perpetrators in that place. I was terrified. I was thrilled to get the evidence, but then I wanted to get out of there as soon as I could because I was terrified. This was my first ever deployment, and I'd left the New Zealand police and gone to work for this a Christian-based organization in the United States. They'd sent me to this location and I met Maria, and I was terrified. Good Christian boy from Christchurch. It was only after I became a Christian that I began frequenting brothels. So I wanted to get out of there as soon as I could, and I headed for the door. Maria intercepted me. She was afraid that she would be punished if she did not satisfy the customer. I was afraid because of three things, thoughts that are probably all going around in your mind as I tell you this story. I was afraid because I'm a sinful man, and I was afraid of my fickle male sinful human nature. I was married, I was going into a brothel, and I was afraid of what I knew I was capable of, but also afraid of what I did not know that I could be capable of. I was afraid. Secondly, I was afraid of the bad guys with guns. There were criminals, organised crime, protecting this place. If they found the camera in my shirt, I was there alone, there was no backup coming, I would not get out of there in one piece. Thirdly, I was afraid of evil. This was a place where women and children were devoured and consumed on a daily basis, and I perceived that I was going behind enemy lines into this brothel. So I was afraid. As I said, I suddenly ended up being dragged by Maria onto the dance floor and not getting out of there, and she grabbed my hands and put them on her backside. She put her hands on my backside and she pulled me into herself just to let me know she was mine to consume whenever I was ready. So it was with a rare moment of inspiration. I thought, well, I'm laying hands on her, I should pray. So I did, and I prayed. And I prayed for her, but I also prayed for me, because as I said, I was terrified. It was a very brief prayer. God, get me out of here. But in that moment, he answered my prayer, and everything changed, and would never be the same for me again. Because when I opened my eyes and I looked at Maria, I saw not a threat to my personal purity as a Christian man or a threat to my professionalism as a detective. I saw a little girl, very similar to my own little sister, in whose life evil had completely devoured and consumed. And I was filled in that moment with this all-consuming hatred, a sense of holy hatred for the forces of evil that had conspired to bring her to that place, and anger, this all-consuming anger at our indifferent world that so allows its boys and its girls to be sold as sex toys. And the still small voice whispered in my ear, "Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Do not be afraid." I had been afraid of the bad guys with guns, but again, it just hit me that I had just recorded enough evidence to facilitate the arrest and prosecution of every criminal in that place. And if anyone was dangerous, it was actually me. If anyone needed to be afraid in that moment, it was all those criminals who unwittingly had just been captured on camera committing crime. And thirdly, as I said, I had been afraid of the forces of evil, but again, inexplicably, the words of a hymn that I sang in my Sunday school popped into my head. This is my Father's world. And I was reminded that God had in no way abandoned this brothel, that it was as much a part of his creation as any mountain scene, and that he was in that brothel as much as he is in any church. He is the God who suffers with those who suffer. He witnessed Maria's defilement night after night, and he heard her prayers for rescue. And I just felt him say very boldly in my heart, "Don't you dare be afraid. I want you to go boldly and courageously to places just like this, because I want to set my children free." So I did over the course of the next 4 years, working for ultimately 2 organizations in more than 12 countries, posing as a pedophile, a sex tourist, a sex tour operator, whatever was necessary to get into these dark places and get evidence that we would then use to rescue the victims and prosecute the perpetrators. What I discovered in doing this work was, as you saw on the video there, just how huge modern-day slavery is. More people in slavery in your generation than at any other time in human history. And the fastest growing form of slavery is this thing called trafficking, deception and coercion. Just like Maria, she was deceived and then coerced. It's, I better remember to use this, it's the fastest growing form of, okay, there we go. The fastest growing crime, international crime in the world today. And in the next 10 years, many estimate that it will become the number one source of income for organised crime. Currently, that's drugs is number one. But unlike drugs, which you sell once, cocaine or heroin, whatever it is, you sell it, it's gone. Little girls and little boys and young women you can sell again and again and again. The profits are huge, more than $32 billion US annually, and the penalties for selling women and children are less than they are for selling drugs. Some of you may have seen the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, and sometimes that's true, wealthy, comparatively wealthy Western New Zealand young women and American young women and so on are trafficked, but the huge majority are poor, and they come from the poorest and most vulnerable people groups on earth. The last point is that yellow graph represents all victims of human trafficking, and the tiny little white part is currently the number of successful rescues, less than 0.5% that result in that victim standing up in court and testifying against the perpetrators. Less than 0.5%. If that was burglaries in Auckland, all of your homes would be broken into right now. And it represents a complete failure on behalf of the international community to do anything significant to fight this problem. My second deployment was to a village in Southeast Asia where we'd been told young children were available for sale. And I walked into this village with an American colleague, and we were taken to one of many houses in this village, and two 14-year-old girls were brought in. My American friend did all the conversation. He was a retired Special Forces soldier, and he was in his element, and he was talking. He said, "These girls are great." He put money down as a deposit. He knew I was recording the whole thing. He said, "Are we good to go?" But I'd seen the intelligence, and so I said, "No, actually, these girls are a bit old for me. I want something different. I'm going to go somewhere else." And at that point, the pimp left the room, and he came back into the room a few moments later, and he had two 6-year-old girls. And he said, for $30 you can have these girls for 1 hour and do whatever you want. My American soldier friend at that point went really quiet. He just shut down because nothing in his military experience had prepared him for that. He didn't know what to do. He just wanted to blow something up. As a Kiwi cop, though, I was thrilled because I was seeing it through the eyes of someone gathering evidence. And I thought, this is fantastic evidence. This guy is screwed. There's no way he can say he thought these girls were 18. I said, these girls are perfect. I've got some clients, actually, that would love to come and have some time with these children. Have you got any more? And he said, yes, absolutely. And over the next 3 weeks, he introduced me to a number of other pimps who in turn introduced me to more than 50 children between the ages of 5 and 12 who were being sold every day in that village to men from New Zealand and United States and Australia, the wealthy West. And so I arranged to have a sex party and to bring my clients to have sex with these children, and we put some deposits down and we gave them clothing. And on the prearranged day, those children with their pimps turned up and a bus pulled in with my clients, except much to their horror, 80 armed police officers got off that bus and raided that village. And we rescued many of those children. The youngest child I carried out of a brothel that day was 5 years old. But thankfully, that 5-year-old is now 15, and she's in high school, along with the other girls that we rescued, and she wants to be a lawyer. They were placed in aftercare, initially World Vision and then Hagar, both amazing organisations that look after women and children rescued from sex trafficking. In some cases, these girls will stay with them until they're 18 because their parents and their families were involved. Equally importantly, as the rescues, were the prosecutions. Because if all you do is the rescue and no one's held accountable, they're quickly replaced. But 10 offenders were arrested and sentenced to between 10 and 20 years imprisonment, which in that part of the world was a groundbreaker and a game changer. Because up until then, in that part of the world, nobody was held accountable for those crimes. And I discovered how incredibly easy it is to combat this crime against humanity. It is the most preventable man-made disaster and the greatest moral challenge, I believe, of our time. The good news, as I said earlier, is that Jesus came to set people free. Yes, he came to set us free from all that stuff that we traditionally call sin that will suck the life out of us if we let it. But he also came to set us free from everything that enslaves us. Otherwise, it's not the whole gospel. The amazing thing I discovered is how incredibly easy it is to fight this business because it is a business, and the people selling their products need a customer. So every day as we sit here this morning, around the world, brothels and go-go bars and karaoke clubs are opening their doors and allowing men to come inside, sometimes women, primarily men. And they open their business and they allow the customer to come in and meet with all of the people who are running that business and to see how it operates and to meet one-on-one time with the victims. And I spent 3 days in a brothel the size of this building. It was a factory. We'd been told, a girl actually escaped and told us about the woman there, so they tried to send an American, they tried to send a Thai, they were both sent away, so they sent the Kiwi. And I turned up with my backpacking flag on, and as most Kiwis, were really well liked. And so it was very easy for me to get in there, and I would buy the woman. In this particular place, there were about 100 from 7 different nations. They'd all been promised legitimate jobs in teaching, retail, car sales. They'd all arrived, had their passports taken, raped, locked up in a factory, and told that you have a debt to pay off. If you ever try and leave, this is what we will do to your little brother or sister back home. In some cases, they'd take them to a tall building and push one of them off and say to the other 10, this is what will happen if you try and escape. So they lived in absolute terror. So I paid to have sex with these women and recorded that transaction. And then in the bedroom with the girl would have to make up some excuse as to why that wasn't going to happen. Sometimes I'd say, I'm from New Zealand. We don't have sex. We're a very small country. Or I'd say, look, I've just broken up with my girlfriend. You know, I'm really broken. I'm devastated. I just want some company. Where are you from? How long have you been here? When are you going home? What do you mean you're not going home? Why do you have to pay off this debt? And who do you have to pay it to? And who owns this place? And why can't you tell the authorities? Well, the authorities come here as well and get paid off. Who are they? And talking over the course of an hour typically with them and again covertly recording their statement, after spending 3 days in that brothel with 3 separate women who all of them in each case held my hand. When they sensed that this strange little man from New Zealand had a bit more compassion than their normal customer, they began to weep and took my hand and begged and said, please come back for me. Please get me out of here. We couldn't go to the local police because they were corrupt. We had to go to the police in the capital city several hours away who sent a team and ultimately raided that brothel, and 99 women were rescued. And they were all successfully repatriated to their families. And I don't have time to tell you the stories of homecoming to families who had given up their daughters for dead. Because if it was one of your children, or your sisters or nieces, grandchildren, is there any distance you would not travel? Is there any money that you would not spend to set them free? This required a change in my theology, this work, because up until then I had a traditional conservative evangelical theology which said, and I was taught in my Sunday school years, as a young man, as a Christian, you have to put on the full armour of God. to protect you from that big bad world out there, all those evil things like Harry Potter. And so I used to carry this shield of faith, which ultimately became a big bubble that I lived in my Christian community. But doing this work forced me to realize that actually when Paul was talking about putting on the full armor of God and taking up the shield, he was talking about these Roman soldiers who used to put their shields together, as you can see in the picture there, and form a phalanx. And they became the most formidable army in the world and ultimately led to the expansion of the Roman Empire because they used their shields to advance. They used their shields to advance and then used their sword. And my Bible says the kingdom of God is advancing, and it's the gates of hell that cannot stand against it. In other words, we are the dangerous ones. The most dangerous force for good in the world today is the church of Jesus the Christ, who overcame all darkness and all evil. And he called together this army, which sadly so often became an audience. But actually he called together an army that he could then send out into these other dark places to set other people free. We live in a global village, and I tell you today that if we do not act, and especially the church, if the church does not act, then your children's children will grow up in a world just like the Roman Empire when slavery was commonplace on every street corner. Just in case you're tempted to think at this point that I am any different from you and that somehow I have anything special, I need to tell you about what happened during my very last deployment. After 4 years of doing this work, which I loved, I was burned out. As you can imagine, all-consuming work, and really great when the rescues went well, but sometimes they didn't. Sometimes I had to get back on a plane and fly home knowing that I'd failed. And for whatever reason, the police made a phone call before we got to the target, and the children or the women were gone, and I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to do with that except become all the more zealous and intense about always being successful, and I began to take greater and greater risks. I had little in the way of supervision or debriefing. I started to believe that really toxic belief that sometimes we as Christians are especially vulnerable to believing that it's all up to me. And I was with a 29, 30-year-old woman from the Ukraine. She had been trafficked some years earlier, but she had paid off her debt. And she had come back to Jamaica, where I was. And I recorded her story. And then I said, as I often said, I don't want sex, so just give me a massage and I'll take you back to the bar. And in the course of that massage, I was morally compromised. And I betrayed my wife. I betrayed my wedding vows. I betrayed all that I believed in. I betrayed my God. And I had started to believe that I was James Bond, Superman. And it suddenly hit me in a very forceful way that I was just a man. And I went into shock. Actually, I couldn't believe it had happened. So I said, I have to take you back. And I took her back to the bar. I came back to the hotel. I shut the door and I collapsed and sobbed and sobbed. I was completely undone and completely broken. And the voice of self-condemnation and accusation said in my ear, "We've finally got you. You who have stood in front of churches and said that light is stronger than darkness, what are you going to say now? What are you going to say now?" 3 days later, a pastor friend from New Zealand called me and I confessed. And he said to me, he gave me a glimpse of light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. And he said, "In the name of Jesus, the great abolitionist, you are forgiven." And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Don't be fooled into believing that unlike every other person on earth, you are the only one who is not qualified to receive his grace." I said, "Yep, that's me." And he said, "Well, you need to look at these women and children who you have rescued, because every day they have to make a choice. And it's a choice as to whether they will be defined by the shame of their experience for the rest of their lives, or whether all things can be made new, and whether there is grace, and whether they can live for the rest of their lives with their head held high in freedom. And so it began a very long journey for me. My wife and I returned back to New Zealand. We tried for 2 years to hold our marriage together and ultimately failed. And we divorced in 2010. And as I said, I was completely undone. It was the police psychologist said to me, you need to go and write down your thoughts. It'll be very cathartic. And I got a bit carried away and it became a book. Thanks. God in a Brothel. And it was cathartic to write. But I wrote it because I hoped in writing it that other people would read it, and in so reading it would meet the people that I have met and see what I'd seen and hear what I had heard, and in doing so that they would not have a Bible study and would not put it on their shelf, but that they would act. They would be inspired to act. On the back of the book, as I said, in 2011 when this was being published, I talked about this organisation that I dreamed about, a New Zealand initiative called Nvader, that would use best practices, that would learn from my mistakes, both personal and professional, and that would use the very best of the Kiwi and the South Pacific culture to do this work well. And a number of people read the book and said, yeah, we believe in that dream, and ultimately at the end of last year, Nvader became a reality. Nvader has 3 goals. It's to rescue victims of sex trafficking, to facilitate the prosecution of the perpetrators, but thirdly, it's to empower the global community, especially local law enforcement, but in particular, the most dangerous force for good, this sleeping giant called the church, to empower, hopefully inspire and engage you to join in this fight to set people free from everything that enslaves them. So we only operate by best practices. We don't send men out by themselves. We only send people out as part of a team. We have mandatory debriefing and briefings in the field, a clinical psychologist for our teams just to make sure that this stuff doesn't mess with you. The spouse has to be included in all of the decision making, really robust HR policies, a whole lot of stuff, and we use really good the strengths of our Kiwi culture. We are self-effacing. It's not about us. We just want to get the number 8 bit of wire. We're good at just getting the job done. We're really well liked in the Asia Pacific region. We're the least corrupt country on earth. There's a whole lot of reasons why Kiwis are really good at doing this work. And history shows us that when the church actually catches just a glimpse, catches just a tiny bit of God's compassion for people in these situations and just a tiny bit of his courage, that we can change the course of the globe. William Wilberforce in the United Kingdom and the Clapham Group, which was the church primarily, ended slavery in that time. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement in the United States, and more recently Nelson Mandela, Bishop Desmond Tutu in South Africa. When the church moves from audience to army, we are able to do amazing things. So, Nvader. These photos were taken about a month ago in Southeast Asia, and it's our team doing surveillance on a brothel, ultimately participating in a raid with the local authorities once we'd taken the evidence to them, leading to the rescue. That's putting the 5 young girls who were trafficked from Laos to Thailand were rescued that night and placed in aftercare, and 2 perpetrators, the trafficker and the operator of this brothel, were imprisoned. And the good news that I actually, just before I say that, these are padlocks on the outside of the brothel doors in that brothel to make sure the girls didn't get out. And this is what the inside of a brothel in Southeast Asia, the bedroom, looks like. And I don't normally show the faces of victims, but today I thought it was appropriate. This girl is 11 years old. And the good news is today she is free. Because the New Zealand church, through Nvader, showed up on her behalf and set her free from hell on earth. And the good news I woke up to a text this morning is that in Southeast Asia last night, a Kiwi detective, former detective from Auckland, New Zealand, and a former policewoman from Hamilton, New Zealand, worked with our Thai investigators and rescued 5 underage girls, 5 children, from a brothel just last night, which made my day. Jesus is not our boyfriend. Some of the worship that we are tempted to listen to that comes out of the West, you would be forgiven for believing that he was our boyfriend, there just to make our life easier. He is our commander-in-chief. And today I invite you to join with us and as a church respond and become part of this dangerous force for good. Bishop Desmond Tutu said of the slavery in South Africa, he said there is no neutral position, because if you remain neutral in the face of huge injustice, you are automatically siding with the oppressor. So today I invite you to do something so that you're not remaining neutral and siding with the oppressor. And Kira's going to come up shortly and go through a list of things that through Pabster, through your community, you can get involved in. Through Nvader, we also have a table out there with these books. They sell at Manor Books and Whitcoulls for $30-something. You can get them today for $20 because I get them cheap from the distributor. I'll even sign it for you, and that'll be worth a lot of money one day. It's a bestseller. People just don't know it yet. And we have these shirts. Our motto, as you might have guessed, is in the face of great evil, be dangerous. And these shirts were made by an organisation called Free Set, which rescues a Kiwi group in Calcutta, India. And they provide employment for women coming out of the sex industry, some of them trafficked, to make these shirts. So by buying the shirt, which is $30, I can't discount those, you're supporting Free Set and you're also supporting Nvader. And this symbol here in the next 10 years will become the symbol of fear for traffickers around the world. I hope. Just like Zorro, you know. In conclusion, we talk a lot in the church about knowing God, and that's at the heart of our message, isn't it? That not only does God know us, but that we can know him. Jeremiah 22:16, if you want to look it up later, says, he rescued the poor and the oppressed. Is that not what it means to know me? He rescued the poor and the oppressed. Is that not what it means to know me? So the simple challenge I leave with you today is that at a time when there are more people in slavery than ever before in history, if we as the church are not somehow doing something in the fight to set them free, can we really say that we know him at all? In closing today, I forgot to mention our goal with Nvader is in the next 10 years to impact 200,000 women and children in the sex trafficking industry, either through rescue or prevention, or through churches being empowered throughout the Asia-Pacific region. That's 10% of the 2 million that are trafficked around the world. We figure that a New Zealand group will just take responsibility for 200,000. The only way we're ever going to reach that goal is if you join us. And I'll leave Kira to talk more about how you do that. In closing today, I don't pray that God would keep you safe. I think if we as Christians especially walk through life, as we often do, asking God to keep us and our loved ones safe, and we ultimately arrive safely at the grave, we have missed the point. And I don't pray that God would bless you, because if you're sitting here this morning, you are already blessed more than 95% of the world's population. My prayer for you this morning, my plea on behalf of 11-year-old girls like this, is that you would be dangerous. You would join us in the fight against evil. You would link shields with us, your shield of faith, and we would become, like the Roman Empire or the Roman army, an impenetrable force, a dangerous force for good.